Thank you for coming today, everybody. So we have Deanna Deterding, our restoration technician who started back in early summer with us. She is presenting on moth ecology today, and she will go into a little bit of her background. But again, feel free to unmute, ask questions during your presentation, or save them to the end for Deanna. She is gonna be able to explain all about this and have time to ask or answer questions for you guys at the end. And with that, I'll let Deanna do a little introduction of herself, and she'll take it away.
Well, thank you everybody for coming to listen to me talk about moths. I feel like every time I say the word moth, people think I say moss, like M-O-S-S. So just know that we are not talking about moss. We are talking about moths. If you came and thought this was about moss, then feel free to leave right now. But we're going to continue with moths. No, I cannot. There we go. So some of my background, I got my bachelor's degree at Maryville University in St. Louis, and I studied environmental science and sustainability. And my sophomore year, I joined a pollination biology lab. That was where I first got introduced to habitat restoration and working with pollinators, and I absolutely fell in love with doing field work. And I knew that this was the kind of field that I wanted to pursue. So then I went on to get my master's degree at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, where I studied ecology and habitat restoration. And this is where I first started working with moths. I had worked with pollinators in the past, so I knew for my research, I wanted to involve pollinators and habitat restoration. They kind of go hand in hand too. So I decided to work with moths and use them as indicator species, which I'll explain a little bit later. To identify like changes in the prairie vegetation with utilizing different management strategies. And then now I am here at Litzinger Road Ecology Center as the habitat restoration technician, and I could not be happier. Keep pressing the wrong button. So what are moths and why are we talking about them? How do you identify them versus butterflies, and why are they important? If anybody watches the Powerpuff Girls, that's what this slide was modeled after. So butterflies and moths, they're both Lepidoptera, in the order Lepidoptera, but they have quite a few differences. First of all, butterflies are active during the day or they're diurnal, and moths are active at night or nocturnal. Butterflies, when they're at rest, their wings are folded back, like behind their bodies. And moths, they rest their wings like flat or kind of in like a tent shape over their bodies. And then in general, butterflies tend to be a lot more colorful and brightly colored, whereas moths tend to be duller. Granted, this Luna moth here is not a great example of a dull moth because it's very vibrant. And then next, their antennae differ as well. So butterflies tend to have very long, scaly, bare antennae, and moths have these leaf or feather-shaped antennae. The bodies of moths and butterflies is also different. So butterflies, as you can see by these photos, they're a lot more lean and smooth and scaly, whereas moths tend to be stocky and fuzzy. In my opinion, moths are a lot cuter than butterflies, up close at least. So they also have some similarities and differences in their general life cycle. So when they start as eggs, they're laid on a specific host plant for that moth or butterfly. And this is important because that is the food that they have co-evolved with to eat. So they'll be able to eat this. Provides them sustenance for whenever they hatch and they become larvae or caterpillars, which you use those interchangeably. But then the differences come whenever they start to pupate. Butterflies form chrysalises, which is made out of the caterpillar's skin. So it comes from themselves. And then moths, they form cocoons, which is spun by silk. Chrysalises are typically attached to like a branch of some sort, or, grass or forb or something. Whereas cocoons are typically found in like leaf litter and or in the ground. And then whenever they, go through their metamorphosis, they come out as either a butterfly or moth, and then they repeat the cycle. Adults, they have their life cycle is also very variable. So some adults, they will live for a very short period of time, from, like weeks to months, and some even over-winter as adults, which is, I feel like, more so they're overwintering as pupa, but adults also do it too. So you can find adults in the wintertime. And then some butterflies and moths will, a lot of them will feed as adults, but there are some that do not feed at all, like on nectar. So as I mentioned before, when the eggs are laid, they're on a host plant. And this is very important for moths, especially, but also like 90% of insects need host plants that they've evolved with. So whenever you plant a plant that is, not from the area, then this is kind of ecologically doesn't have any purpose. It doesn't support the native ecosystem at all. Some common host plants for moths, there are a lot of trees and shrubs support moths. I know that's not to say that forbs and grasses and sedges don't support them at all, but I find that a lot of moths have tree or shrub host plants. So those are always good options if you're using them in your landscaping. And then adults, when they become adults, they get their food sources, if they do feed as adults, they get them from a variety of things, not just flowering plants, but rotting fruits, sap, animal droppings, and other interesting liquids that they can find. And moths are not necessarily just tied to one area to one ecosystem. So they are laid on their host plant. So for instance, this woolly bear, a caterpillar, it's laid on its host plant, of which elm is one of its host plants, along with other trees. And then it becomes the Isabella tiger moth. And from there, it can be found in a variety of ecosystems, but it probably won't travel too far from its host plants, because whenever it mates, it needs to be able to find that host plant. So why are moths important to the ecosystem? Well, one, they're very numerous. They actually outnumber butterflies 14-1 globally, which whenever I heard that statistic, I was kind of blown away, because I knew there were more moths than butterflies, but that is an impressive ratio. And because they're so numerous, they provide a lot of food for other species. So birds especially, and bats, salamanders eat them, mammals, other insects even. So they're providing a lot of food for other animals. They also are great nighttime pollinators. I like to say that moths work the night shift, because you got your bees and your butterflies out during the day. Moths, they work the night shift. But also something that you might not think about that caterpillars are doing, the caterpillars to these moths, is that they actually break down a lot of plant material quicker than a plant would regularly decompose, and they bring that nitrogen back into the environment quicker, which is a fancy way of saying that they poop. But it sounds better when you say it like that. So moths are pollinators, and they're overlooked and understudied, because bees and butterflies they tend to steal the show. They're also out during the day, where it's easier to study bees and butterflies. And moths, they come out at night, and nighttime research is just not as easy. That's when people are typically sleeping. So kind of provides a barrier there. But there's more studies being done on moths that's suggesting that they're actually contributing a lot more to pollination than previously thought. Now, bees are definitely the king when it comes to pollinators, or queens, because, bee pun there. But that's not to say that moths are not contributing. And if you think about it, moths are moths, butterflies, other pollinating insects, they're, contingency plans or backups to bees. Bees do a lot of pollination, but there are some plants that need to be pollinated by specific pollinators, such as moths. And with that, some plants are actually adapted to be moth pollinated. For instance, like Enethera, those are moth pollinated plants. But some characteristics of plant pollinated flowers are they have pale colors, so either yellow or white. They have a strong, like, sweet smell to them. They're tubular shaped. If they flower late at night or late in the afternoon, then that is perfect window for moths. And then also flowers that are in clusters and provide like a landing platform. Those are good for moth pollination as well. So there is a relationship between plants and moths that is why I called them indicator species earlier. And now a lot of insects are indicator species, and all it takes to be an indicator species is that you are very sensitive to small changes in your environment. So like salamanders, those aren't insects, but those can be indicator species. Or if you're in a lab, you can use bacteria because those change that affects the bacteria is affected by small changes. So for insects, when they're infected by small changes in the environment, it often involves plants. So with moths, when plant diversity is reduced or increased, that directly affects moth diversity as well. And because of this relationship, you can use them to detect differences in things like management strategies and habitat types. So with management strategies, if you were to, have been multiple studies on forest cuttings. So whenever they cut trees in forests, they studied basically what level of cutting a moth community could handle that wouldn't change it all that much. They did different levels of cutting. Clear cutting obviously just kind of destroyed the moth population there. But then they found a way to be able to cut some trees out of the forest stands while also not impacting moth diversity entirely. And with habitat types, there's different moths are found in different habitats, so forest versus prairie. And so there will be different species that live in those areas, and you can tell the difference just by sampling those habitats, which is kind of what I was going for with my research. It was a combination of looking at these two things, management and habitat type. So because moths are very sensitive to changes in their environment, things like habitat loss, fragmentation, and overall like reduced plant diversity all like heavily impact them. And with habitat loss, we have these great open spaces, open lawn areas, of which like I think 40 million acres in the US are just open lawn spaces that are ecologically, dead zones. This is not serving anything. There could be flowers like up near the front of this house that might like attract some pollinators, but the pollinator would have to cross all of this open space to get to that flower, which is going to be hard if there's no food to support them along the way. And also, if there is a plant out there that is a host plant for them, well, once they become a caterpillar, then pupate, it's essentially a trap, because this kind of lawn is probably not the kind of lawn that is going to allow for leaf litter to remain there. And that is very important to protect cocoons that are lying on the ground. But there is a lot, because there's so much space, that creates an opportunity for people to be able to improve their lawns and create spaces that are ecologically functional for ecosystems. So you can turn your backyard into a pollinator garden, something like this, or even places like this where you utilize trees and put it along your sidewalks, or this top right picture where it pretty much looks like they primarily have coneflower out there. And that's all right. It's providing an ecosystem for moths to survive, and not just moths, other, butterflies, insects, bees. These are all great spaces for insects, and they're ecologically functional. That's the key here, is providing spaces for moths and other insects to be able to have connectivity throughout the ecosystem. So habitat restoration is essentially what you would be doing in your own yard. It's not just for, here at Litzinger, we have these gorgeous prairies out here, and, something large like this, you might not be able to do on your property, but even converting part of your property to like a pollinator garden is beneficial for these other insects and animals that, rely on those insects for food. So habitat restoration, it provides habitat, it provides food for these insects, and those insects will provide food for other animals up the food chain or in the food web. And it also provides things to us as well. So we get pollination services for, our crops, as well as water management and erosion control and filtration throughout the soil, which those are both great things that we definitely need. So why is all of this important? Well, we need insects because without them, most flowering plants would go extinct. And that is something that we definitely do not want, because it has other consequences, such as the food web would collapse. Many organisms rely on moths and other insects for food. And if we take away that food, then that is going to have catastrophic effects up the food chain. And it will impact human life as well. Now, human life could not be supported. That sounds a bit extreme, but when you think about it, that's exactly how it would go. Is other animals would not be supported, and so humans could not be supported, because a lot of our life is determined by the ecosystem services that we get from plants and animals. So what can you do? We have to have solutions to this. So converting your lawn as much as you feel comfortable into native landscaping, that would be beneficial. And at least in my opinion, and I hope in a lot of your guys' eyes, you see this photo on the right and you think that it is like much more gorgeous than this open landscape here. Now that in this picture, this person does have some landscaping up there, so they're at least doing something. But here you've got native plants that would give great support to our native insects. And it's a functional ecosystem. There's so much beauty in the fact that you are providing habitat and food to insects that need it. Another key part when you're thinking about landscaping is using keystone species, which is Doug Talamay's word for plant. Well, not just his word, but he uses this when he talks about oak trees in his book, The Nature of Oaks, and other books that he has. But oaks would be considered keystone species, where a bunch of other insects actually use oaks as part of their life cycle and have oaks as host plants. There are also other trees and shrubs and plants that would probably be considered keystone species as well, but oaks are a really big one. Now, flowering plants are, of course, very important for nectaring insects, as well as providing host plants. And then as well, like other trees and shrubs are great to plant as well. Removing invasive species. This is always going to be something that you can do to help native insects and moths, because these invasive plants are providing no service to moths and other insects. And now, especially for moths and other nighttime insects, is reducing your light pollution. So using LED lights, yellow LED lights, I should specify, outside of your house, because white light has different like I'm missing the word, but I cannot think of the word. Anyway, moving on. But yellow light, it does not attract as many insects as white lights or other lights would. So if you use a yellow LED, you'll still be able to see, and you won't have tons of insects flying around your light, which nobody probably wants that anyway, because then if say you're going to this shed, you'd have to walk through a bunch of insects. And then secondly, using downlighting. So downlighting is kind of what you see in this photo of the shed, where on the top of the light, they kind of have a metal part that's directing the light downwards instead of up. This would be great for reducing overall light pollution and also making sure that you're attracting less insects. And lastly, don't use bug zappers. They mostly kill the non-target insects, and not, the mosquitoes and other biting insects that you're trying to kill, but the things that are just happen to be attracted to that light and then die. So I've put all of them kind of in a numbered list if anybody wanted to take a photo, but the last one I think that is also very important, and that all of you are doing right now, is continuing to learn more. That is something that is very important when we're talking about nature, because we're always, scientists and researchers and land managers, they're always learning more about what they can do to provide healthier landscapes. And by you guys doing this as well, then we now can work together to figure more things out and make sure we're doing the best we can. And if you need any identification resources, I also have this slide here. There's lots of apps that you can use for identifying insects, so you can learn more about them. And then these books, the top 3, those are field guide books, and they're great. I personally do use all of these. And then the last one, it's not a ID book, but it is it's a really great book to read if you want to learn more about moths and their life cycles and all of the things that rely on them, especially birds. And thank you for coming. And if you have any questions, I will love to answer them. And I see things coming in. Okay, so Susan asked, how do moths navigate in the dark? Do they need some light? So this is actually, so they often will use the moonlight to navigate. Now, when the moon is completely dark, they're still able to see in the dark. So the way moths see is actually something that's still currently being studied. There are quite a few theories as to how moths see and how they orient themselves at night, but nobody has found out an exact answer. But kind of the leading theory is that they use the moon to orient themselves, and that's why when you have lights out, like on your front porch or street lighting, they're drawn to it because they basically are confused, because the moon is no longer up in the sky, it is now much closer to them, and that confuses them. And then Sarah asked, top host plants for some of the most pressured moths in Missouri. I'm not exactly sure on that. Like any endangered moths, like what those host plants would be. I don't know that exact answer, but I could look it up and find out for you. I will write that down. Okay. Lynn asked, are there moths that are considered invasive species? If so, what problems do they cause? Yes, so there are definitely insects or moths that are not native that cause a lot of problems, and a lot of times the ones that are probably considered invasive but could also be native are ones that are agricultural pests. So the corn earworm moth, that one is considered an agricultural pest. It's native, but it eats a lot of crops and things like that. And there are actually quite a few native species that do eat agricultural crops. And so those would be considered pests. Mary asked, could you show the last slide with the resources so I can take a picture of it? Yes, I can. So that is extra things. The resources. Here we go. I'll leave it on that slide. Do moths migrate like butterflies do? Yes, yeah, not all of them do, but there are moths that migrate like butterflies do. And actually there was an interesting study that found that so you think of moths and butterflies as probably just kind of like, you know, hopping from plant to plant, and that's how they make their migration. But there are moths and Lepidoptera in general that will actually go really far up into the sky and use the jet streams to migrate. So they get they get pretty far pretty fast. And basically they imagine a giant net, and they flew it up into the sky at like different heights in the sky, and they like, you know, found nothing, or maybe a little couple things, and then once they got to a certain point, they actually found quite a few Lepidoptera up there, which also makes sense for when they cross bodies of water. And host plants. So there are so many moths that it would almost be like their host plants. They host on a variety of things. I can give some examples. So like the witch hazel moth, that's kind of, it hosts on witch hazel. Swallowtails, they like pawpaw. But then like there are a load of caterpillars that will feed off of goldenrods. That's actually a really good thing. Like goldenrod can be kind of weedy in your like in prairies, like it's very abundant, but there are a lot of things that host on that plant as well. So you kind of have to weigh your options. You don't want completely goldenrod, but you do want to support moths. And then native cherries, those are really good trees. They support a lot of moths. Ashes, and then of course there are probably lots of things that would love to eat your garden plants, but we don't like those necessarily. James says gypsy moth is probably the most talked about invasive exotic moth because of the immense damage that it has done to eastern forest. Yes, that is true. Alrighty. Any more questions?
Looks like Caroline's got her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention my newest pet peeve is the mosquito squad and other companies that come in and spray yards supposedly to get rid of mosquitoes. And when I went on the mosquito squad website, it said that mosquitoes eat leaves. And so that's why they need to spray. And they kill every insect in your yard. Yep. And people, you see these little signs all over the place. And I think that's something we really need to consider how to fight.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like spraying for mosquitoes is a horrible thing to do. Because yeah, they're not just killing mosquitoes. And honestly, spraying for mosquitoes is killing them in the wrong like stage of life. You want to kill them when they're larvae. And so you can put a like say you put a bucket of water out and with some like kind of let it get some algae on it, make an ecosystem for mosquitoes to lay their eggs. And then there's I think it's called like dunk.
Yeah, mosquito dunk.
Yeah, mosquito dunk. It's like a tablet, and you can throw that in the water bucket, and then that will kill the larva. And it's actually not harmful to like, as far as I know, it's not harmful to like pets and other things that if they were to drink out of it, it wouldn't kill like your dog or anything like that. But maybe don't let like voles or mice or something jump into that. But yeah, it's killing them when they're larvae would be killing them when that would be the right time to kill them, not when they're adults. And you're going to kill so many other things as well. Any more questions? Alrighty.
Yeah. Sounds like that is about it for questions.
I've got one.
Okay.
There we go.
What's your favorite moth?
My favorite moth, I love this question because my favorite one is it's called the beautiful wood nymph. And actually, I think I have it on a slide here. So this was a cool slide if anybody, like an extra slide talking about moth camouflage, but this the one that's center to the right, that's the beautiful wood nymph moth. And its camouflage is after a bird dropping. And I just think that the name is just so funny for what it's trying to mimic. Can you tell which one is the moth and which one's the bird dropping? It's the top one. The top one's the bird, or not the bird, the moth. Yeah, that one would have to be my favorite just because I think it's pretty, but also it's mimicking something funny.
Where do you see those?
Like location wise, you can find them around here.
Are there particular plants that they're drawn to?
Like host plants or things that
Yeah, or just what, like,
I am not actually sure. I can't remember off the top of my head, I cannot remember the host plant. I know I found it in a prairie.
Yeah, I feel like they know what they're disguised as, Susan, because like anytime I've ever seen one, they're on like the surface of a leaf. Like they're just like sitting like out right in the open, like where you would think it's like a bird dropping.
Ah.
So I've taken photos of them here on site, and they've just been like out on like wood nettle or spice bush, like just sitting on top of a leaf.
Mhm.
All right. Is there more in the chat? Okay, no, just thank you. So great job, Deanna. Thank you for presenting to everyone. And we will see you all later. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.